Okay, so this is a response to Yvette Carnell's last video about HR 40. So for those of you who do not know, Yvette Carnell is another YouTuber, another political analyst, and she is pushing for reparations, slavery reparations. And what's so unique about Yvette Carnell is she's pushing for specifically American descendants of slavery. So in her plan, reparations will be paid to black people that actually descend from American slavery. And I think it's really important that she's doing what she's doing. I like her movement because I am, in fact, ADOS myself. And I like that we have a movement now that where black people from America can take pride in being American, because that is who we are. We're not Africans. I mean, we are Africans in a sense, but we chiefly, who we are is from America, and our culture is American. And I do like that we now have a movement that is centered around us. However, in her last webcast, she explains that the bill for reparations that's in Congress right now, it's not a full bill. It is a House resolution. It's HR 40, House Resolution 40. And she explained in the last podcast or the last webinar that HR 40 is only 14 pages long, double-spaced, and it's not a serious bill. She also explained that it is sponsored by Sheila Jackson Lee, who is not well liked in Congress and does not have the juice to push it through Congress. So what she's telling you right now is that the bill they have in Congress and reparations in general isn't really ready for prime time. At the same time, she's telling you that she can't be for a presidential candidate that doesn't support HR 40 or some form of reparations. Those are two contradictory things. So, just to reiterate, I do believe that I do support the idea of reparations. The idea that because black Americans were specifically targeted to be disadvantaged, you have to have something specifically targeted to fix us. I agree with that on a moralistic level. However, I realize it's not realistic because essentially most people hate us. Like, everybody thinks we're all gangsters or wannabe gangsters. You got Jordan Peterson running around telling everybody we have low IQ. Like, there's not a groundswell of people in the greater amount of America that is actually for reparations. And on top of that, the legislation we have in the House right now isn't really even ready for prime time. So you can't turn around and say, Bernie Sanders can't say, well, I don't understand what reparations is and I don't understand how we're going to give it out, when you admit that the legislation they have on the books right now isn't good, detailed legislation. So you can't really fault Bernie Sanders for not being for it. Another thing that bothers me about Yvette Carnell is that she doesn't back the few people that are for reparations. So Yvette Carnell is on a team with a guy named Antonio Moore, who has another YouTube show called Tonetalks. So they interviewed Marian Williamson, who's the current presidential candidate. Now, in my opinion, Marian Williamson is the only person who's actually for reparations. She wrote in a book in 1997 that she was for reparations. So she's the only presidential candidate that's really for it. And so she came on there to get interviewed, and they didn't endorse her for president. So the only person that actually took the risk to be for reparations, they didn't endorse. So once other presidential candidates see that, they're not going to be for reparations either. Because why would they take a risk to be for reparations and alienate most of their white voter base if it doesn't even translate into at least getting some internet support? The other presidential candidate to be for reparations is Tulsi Gabbard. So she actually signed on to the current bill of H.R. 40. Now, I've been watching Tonetalks and Yvette Carnell every week for the last couple of months. Neither of them ever mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. So as far as this 2020 presidential election, the few people that have been for reparations, or at least H.R. 40, they haven't given any support to. So there's no real incentive for other candidates to really support H.R. 40. Cory Booker is another who made the companion legislation in the Senate. They're not really for him either. So as far as this 2020 election, which is very crucial, they're not really backing anybody. And if you really want this to go through, you need to pick either Cory Booker, Tulsi, or Marianne Williamson to say that we're behind them, we're going to get them in the debates, and we're going to push them forward to get somebody on the 2020 field that wants this done. And so that's why I can't support Yvette Carnell past the idea of ADOS solidifying and being proud of who we are as American descendants of slavery. Like I said, it's a good moral thing, but the legislation we have right now isn't ready for prime time. And it's going to take us longer than a couple of years to get this legislation ready for prime time. And I don't believe that the poor black people, the black people that are struggling, can really handle another 4 years of Trump before we really get anything going. We can't really go through another 4 years of Trump. At the same time I'm saying that, the centrist Democrats aren't going to provide enough resistance to really combat Trump. So I think as far as this 2020 cycle, we really need to pick at least one or two of these progressive candidates we want to be for. Now, once the 2020 election is over, we can think about these long-term things like reparations and things like that, but we can't just forego 2020 and let Trump get in for another 4 years. And I think we really need to think about that as far as political strategy. And I don't really agree with saying that if a candidate isn't endorsing H.R. 40, which we already agree isn't good legislation, that we're not going to vote for them. And we also can't fault the candidates who aren't for it as it is now, because it's not even good legislation. So that's my 2 cents on it. Again, I applaud what Yvette Carnell's doing. I applaud what Antonio Moore is doing. And I think their overall idea of, since black Americans were specifically discriminated against through slavery, through Jim Crow, through redlining, through the Army being segregated, through not getting the GI Bill. All that stuff is true. We were specifically targeted, so the only thing that can fix us is something that is specifically targeted to fix us. I agree with that. However, as far as this 2020 election cycle, we're not ready to hold these candidates' feet to the fire with some actual legislation ready to go. And I also don't think that class-based solutions should just be totally canceled and poo-pooed. I think that universal health care is a black issue. More black people as a percentage aren't insured, and more black people as a percentage can't even afford the subsidized Obama insurance. So until universal health care can be something that helps to stabilize our community. And I think that if there is a candidate that's for universal health care, we as black people have to be for them to help to stabilize our community as it is now. And that'll at least get us across the next couple of years, and then we can push for reparations with actually good legislation and a team of people behind it to push for it. I think things like debt-free college or forgiving student loans is a black issue, because as a percentage, more black people have a larger amount of student debt than other races of people. So class-based solutions might not fix the black community, but at least helps us to stabilize, to push for more things. And I don't think we should just disregard that or just allow Trump to get in and destroy essentially all what we would call as integralism, the blue meme aspect of America, the institutional aspect of America. And so I think we really need to reevaluate and think about this thing before we just throw everything behind this idea of reparations, which we're really not even ready to push for because we don't have legislation and a group of people in Congress to push for it. To get the type of reparations legislation we would need a more progressive Congress, and we would also need a more progressive Supreme Court. So I think what we should really be concentrating on in 2020 is getting progressives elected to Congress and possibly a progressive president. And then work to get a progressive Supreme Court that's going to allow reparations to go through. So even if we push for reparations as it is now, there's no way the Supreme Court that we have now would vote for it. Even the more liberal judges wouldn't be for reparations. So these are all things we need to think about when building a political strategy. So that's why me personally, I consider myself a Sanders supporter and a Tulsi Gabbard supporter, because I see those as the two candidates that are most conducive to getting some class-based solutions on the table. So I would love to hear what you think about this. Please put your comments in the comment section. Please like, subscribe, and if you can, donate through PayPal. And the email address is sdandrace@gmail.com. Thank you.